Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is HarrisX founder and CEO, Dritan Nesho. Dritan, thanks so much for joining me once again.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
As you and I sit here 2 weeks away from Election Day, Forbes and HarrisX has a new poll out that shows the state of the race, and surprise to no one, it is a tight one. When you look at the horse race, when you look at the two-way between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, what are you seeing?
Well, it's a very close race, and I would say razor's edge type of a close race. Um, for the first time, really, since early October or October the 1st, the last poll that we released around that date, it seems like the polls are now starting to move in President Trump's favor. For the last 3 weeks or so, we've had Harris up by about 2 points in the national horse race, and really it's been fairly consistent depending on how you look at that horse race, whether it's a two-way that he Trump v. Harris type question or the four-way, which is closer to what voters will face at the ballot box. And really, President Trump has closed that gap or taken that advantage away from Harris. Right now, we have Trump up by a point, so a net 3 point swing in his favor since earlier this month. Trump is at 40% right now, 47% right now. Harris is at 46%, and a full 8% still remain undecided. When you push those undecideds, which way do you lean right now? Trump is picking up about 54% of those undecideds, and Harris is picking up about 46%. So again, that undecided vote is breaking slightly in Trump's favor. And what that results in when you look at the two-way horse race together with leaners is that Trump gains a little bit more of an advantage. So he's at 51% to Harris's 49%. And it's exactly the same if you look at likely voters, that 80% that say that they're very likely to go out and vote, which is a subset of all of the registered voters that we poll together on a regular basis. So things have started to shift in Trump's favor. That's the bottom line. And it seems like he's closing strong, and he's capitalizing on that edge that he's had, especially in battleground states.
Let's talk about those battleground states because, as you and I have talked about now for months, this race is coming down to those 7 key swing states. When you look at the battleground voters, what numbers are you seeing?
Well, I just want to preface by saying that we capture in our regular polling a subset of voters that are from battleground states. Namely, it's the 8 key states that are actually quite competitive: Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Nevada. In our poll, we've captured about 325 voters from these battleground states. And depending on how you look at the horse race, Trump is leading by as much as 7 to 8 points when you look at the two-way horse race. It closes a little bit when you look at the four-way horse race. So again, Trump v. Harris v. Cornel West v. Jill Stein. So it closes to about 3 points advantage for Trump, 48 to 45 in the four-way. And when you factor in those leaners, it grows slightly to about 4 points advantage. I think if you take the more conservative of these views, right, Trump has the edge with battleground voters, and that's concerning for the Harris campaign, or it should be concerning for the Harris campaign. Nevertheless, this edge that Trump has in the battleground states and with these battleground voters that you see in a lot of the public polling that's out there is counterbalanced by the fact that Harris is winning the early vote. And amongst that 8.5% of voters who have already cast their ballots, so roughly 8.5% of registered voters, or close to about 18 million voters, have already cast their ballots as of today. Harris really has a 2-to-1 advantage with those early voters, and roughly about 60% of the votes that are being cast for her, and about a third of the vote, or 33%, is being cast for Trump. So a dynamic type of a situation. And again, depending on how you look at it, you see some positives for Harris, in this case, namely the early vote, but you see some positives for Trump too, which is the edge in the battleground state and the fact that the polls are starting to shift in his direction now.
I know you said that this is going to be a razor thin election, but when you break it down by demo, you really see certain groups moving to one candidate, certain groups flocking to another one. Can you break it down by demographic, and what are you seeing there?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. Well, look, I mean, we see a clear advantage for Harris with young voters, the 18 to 29 demographic. She's leading by about 10 points, plus or minus, depending on how you look at it, with that demographic. Interestingly enough, Trump is leading with millennial voters, and millennial to, let's say, young Gen Xers, that 30 to 45-year-old demographic. He's got about a 5-6 point advantage, depending on how you look at it. And that's a very interesting development, right? Especially, younger voters are expected to break more Democratic, but really, these millennials who are now household heads and or have young families, they're voting on economics, and the vote is breaking in Trump's favor. Moving on to race and ethnicity, Harris has about a 20-point advantage with Hispanics, depending on how you look at the horse race. If you factor in everything, if you look at the four-way horse race, if you factor in early voters, she's picking up about 55% of the vote for Hispanics, and he's picking up about 35% of the vote for Hispanics. So he's doing quite well, Trump, and also he's doing quite well with the black vote. If viewers remember, in 2020, President Biden captured about 90% of the black vote. Today, Vice President Harris is capturing about 70% of the black vote, and about 20% of that vote, to 22%, is going to Trump. So Trump has doubled his share of African Americans and those votes, and is doing quite well. And then obviously with the white vote, as expected, Trump has a lead. It's about 14 to 15 points based on how you're looking at it. So you see sort of an interesting picture in the demographics, and I would say that really the swing vote and the undecided vote is more than not amongst Hispanic voters and amongst younger voters. There's 18% of voters who say they still might change their mind. That's the swing vote, and they tend to skew very heavily 40-year-old and younger. And also Hispanic voters tend to be more than not kind of on the fence. They tend to be a lot more undecided than sort of that 8% average, and roughly by a factor of double. So there's still enough swing voters and undecided voters there that this could all shift.
18% might still change their mind is a number that I italicized, I bolded, I starred in my notes because I was so struck by that. What could they change their mind to? Are they a Trump voter changing to Vice President Kamala Harris, or vice versa? Are they changing between those third-party candidates? Are they deciding between, should I vote for the candidate of my party, or should I stay home on the couch? What does that look like?
Well, look, I mean, I think that the voters that have made up their mind are tending to slightly skew in favor of Kamala Harris, and those who are still weighing their choices skew slightly more towards Trump, based on what we are seeing right now in the polling. But when you look at party ID, it actually reverses, right? Republicans tend to be more committed to their choice and say that they have made up their mind, and Democrats less so. So I would say that Trump has an opportunity um, with those swing voters to basically make sure that they vote Republican and capitalize on the Republican base's stickiness, right? Usually, the Republican Party is a smaller tent party and tends to be more consistent in its vote than the Democratic Party, which is a broader tent party and has a more diverse set of subgroups within it. But again, with 2 weeks to go, 18% still say that they might make up their mind on one thing or another. So this really, above all, underscores the importance of closing strong and the importance of the next 2 weeks for both of the campaigns. This is still anyone's race. Despite these numbers, despite sort of Harris's momentum up to now and Trump's edge in the battleground states, it's very important for both of the campaigns to stick to their strategies and really push forward, especially with undecideds and swing voters.
I know we're in the final stretch with 2 weeks to close, but we are still in the opening. I mean, most states have early voting, and as you mentioned, Vice President Kamala Harris is performing better than Trump. Right now, historically, Democrats perform better than Republicans when it comes to early voting. So what type of picture is early voting painting now for the 2024 election? Is it foreshadowing any trend or turnout theme that we're going to see on November 5th?
Great question. So early voting at this stage is roughly half of what it was in 2020. Now, that was an unusual election because it was right at the height of the pandemic, and so there was a lot more early ballots cast and mailed in than there are currently today. Also, if you look at it less in terms of who has already cast their ballots, but who is planning to vote early, that 45% that is planning to vote early, compared to that 48% who will vote the day of the election, Harris only has about a 10 points advantage, 10 to 12 points advantage, depending on how you look at it, with those voters that plan to vote early. It's an advantage, but it's much less than Biden's advantage with early voters in 2020. Biden had roughly double that advantage with early voters in 2020. So while the early vote is breaking Democratic and you know it's favoring Democrats, I would say it's still lagging 2020, and that indicator will probably worry the Harris campaign and the Democratic Party, and also it means that this election will break late and it has to be fought up to the last hour and the last minute by both of the campaigns.
It feels like a lifetime ago, but it was actually just a week ago you and I talked, and you said that Vice President Kamala Harris has the momentum while Trump has the advantage. Now when we're looking at these numbers, Trump is slightly taking the lead in this national poll. It's still obviously very close. It's still within a margin of error. He's taking the lead when it comes to battleground voters. Do you think that Trump now has the momentum as well?
It's yet to be seen, but I think that in the next get together, we'll have trended data, and if this swing in the polls, this 3-point swing from when we compare it to earlier this month in Trump's favor, if it sustains and he's winning the national vote, then you would expect him to win the battleground states and the election. If it keeps oscillating back and forth and it's really tied, then it's a razor thin election. It's clear though that Harris is losing some of that early steam, some of that momentum that propelled her up until now. And what that means is that you have to redouble your presence with voters, and you have to close that gap in terms of media appearances, where I believe the Trump-Vance campaign has had over 80 media appearances, and the Harris-Walz campaign has had less than half of that, or maybe even about a third of that. And so there's enough voters that are still yet to make up their mind out there that that gap can be closed, but it requires proactive engagements with voters and making the case.
As you said, it's time for both of these campaigns to really put their foot on the gas here. It's their time to close with these voters, especially those 18% that could potentially change their mind between now and Election Day. So when you're looking at the next 2 weeks, what specifically are you looking out for?
Well, closing strong means pushing the message of the campaign, the theme of the campaign in a very convincing way, and also making sure that voters acknowledge each of the candidates or each of the teams in this case as the agent for that change or the agent for that promise. And then there's multiple ways that Trump can win, and there's multiple ways that Harris can win still. Trump has a clear strength on the issues that matter, on the economy, on foreign policy, on inflation. Talking about those issues and what voters care about is really his path to success and his path to victory, and not making any gaffes or making it too much about himself. And as I've always said, this has always been Trump v. Trump and Harris v. Harris, right? So each of the candidates can still defeat themselves in that lead to the election. On the Harris side of the equation, she has successfully made the case that she can be president. And whether it's through the debate performance, whether it's by going out on the stump, whether it is even with the curated media interviews, voters do see her as being able to exercise leadership and hold the highest office in the land. Where she has weakness is really on the issues. So you could basically boil it down to Harris is winning on character but losing on the issues, and Trump is winning on the issues but still struggles on the character-related issues with the electorate. And it's a question of what takes prominence in the next 2 weeks, and really, is there an October surprise, which can still happen and which can still upend such a tight election.
So we're seeing what matters more to voters, character or issues. We're also waiting for an October surprise within these next 2 weeks. And Dritan, I'm sure we will have many conversations. Hopefully, my fingers are crossed, between now and November 5th. Thank you so much for joining me.
Likewise. Thank you, Team Forbes.